factories or models that are in the application. So I corrected that off stream, pushed a commit to that package. Basically, there's this thing, I'll just show you. Let's just talk about it. So we got our failing test here, but let's just do PHP artisan model show this badge request was the one in question. If you do model show here, you'll notice that in attributes, it shows everything. It shows the columns from the database, what some might call physical attributes, and then it shows the virtual attributes as well. And these are things that I define on the model. In this case, we can see those down here, this card holder and connector. They aren't relationships, they're my own custom attributes, technically is what Laravel calls them, inside of that model. And they appear here. And the factory generator that I had written for Shift, which the test generator uses underneath, didn't separate those out. And we can kind of see here actually in this little column, type and then cast in yellow. And we notice that those particular ones down here don't have a type. In fact, they have a kind of a custom cast, if you will, called accessor. So that's really their only identifiable bit of information in this output. So a little bit technical there, but the point is that to identify only the columns, I basically need to filter or reject these accessors or those things without types. So that's why it was failing. Again, I pushed a patch for that. That's been updated in the test generator as well. The factory generator is open source. It's just a package that the test generator Shift uses underneath. So with this fix, if I were to rerun the test generator, it would have generated all of the factories for me, as we now see in the application. So a little backtracking there, but with that fix, if we go back up to vendor bin, we now get back to the little test that we started writing yesterday to ensure that the show action initiates the download of the particular archive. And we're in a place now where we're getting what I would consider somewhat of a good failure. It's a little dense, but it's a good failure. So let's go ahead and bring up PHP Storm. And let's start making these pass. So the goal for this stream is to write a test for the HTTP controller, which basically makes sure that these archives get created and are downloaded. That's kind of the key feature of this application. So I like to start with, the most important feature. If an application doesn't have any tests and I'm comfortable writing tests, I like to get in there and test the money-making, the most critical feature of the application. So with something like Shift, I have tests for the checkout flow. I want to make sure you can check out and get paid, and the job goes on the queue, and that job calls the right underlying commands. That's the most critical piece of Shift. That's the kind of bread and butter. So that's what I test with. If you're not familiar with testing, then in my Confident Laravel course, I talk about, starting, get the ball rolling, start with something simple, start with an action that just displays a view, get comfortable with testing first. You're not gonna be able to write a test for the most critical piece of the application that touches all these different things until, of course, you're comfortable testing. But again, I'm familiar with testing, so I'm glad to just jump right in and write a test for the most critical piece. And again, that's what this is. The ability to download these badge archives is the most critical piece. So now that PHP Storm is running, let's go check it out. I'm hearing some chat clicks, so let's see what people are saying. Hey Samuel, how's it going? Thanks for joining live again. All right, let's make sure I didn't zoom in my screen. Okay, so if we go to badge request test, I think it's this badge request archive controller test. This is our test. So here's our failure. So again, if you're joining new today, most of this code was generated for us. I've simply changed it from an assert OK to an assert download, because that's what this particular controller does. So let's go ahead and bring up this controller as well. So let me change this to archive controller. Let's bring this up. PHP Storm is indexing things, so you might hear a little humming in the background. So again, the show action on the surface pretty straightforward. Implicit model binding of the archive requests, and pretty much just turns around and immediately allows you to download that particular request. Now, in looking at this, again, this is something I wrote, but I wrote it several years ago. And looking at this, there's actually a couple things that I would probably change. And maybe we'll do another stream tomorrow of refactoring. But you really can't truly refactor unless you have tests. So I want to go ahead and write a test for a couple of these things first. And then maybe tomorrow, armed with those tests, we'll do some refactoring, some true refactoring. And I say that in the Michael Feathers sense of the word. True refactoring can't be done without tests. This is something that he claims in his book. I think it's Legacy Applications or Refactoring Legacy Applications or something like that. That's kind of his mandate, is like, you got to have tests if you want to truly refactor. Otherwise, you're just rewriting code. You have no proof that the behavior is the same. And that's the kind of definition of refactoring. Okay. So we're not getting a download here. Now the code looks to be doing a download, so we have a bit of an issue here. So I'm just going to do some poor man's debugging here of archive ID. So we got a little dump here. When I run this again, we don't see the dump. So again, being familiar with testing, I think I know what's going on here. There's two issues. First of all, we are acting as this user, but I know this application. You can't just be any old user. You have to be an administrator to be able to download these badge archives. So I made a little state on this factory administrator. We might have done that live, but if not, let me just jump into the user factory. So I've got these different states. By default, a user is just an employee of the system. Again, this is an intranet application, so by default, you're just an employee, but I've made these other states for a processor or an administrator. That's who you have to be to see this section. So we're probably getting kicked out based on the middleware and the policies or whatever that are being set here. I think it's just some basic middleware. So administrator, there we go, if we spell it right. That should work. Is that right? Administrator? I think so. All right, let's run this again. Okay, we're still not seeing our dump. So what else is going on here? Acting as user administrator. Did I spell that wrong? Administrator. All right. Okay, so why are you not happy with us? Let's do this. Let's change this to response assert OK. See what we're getting kicked out as. Oh, okay, we get a different error now. Interesting. Attempt to read property ID on null. Okay, that's interesting. Attempt to read property ID on null. Model users 60. All right, let's go take a look at this. Users, line 6. Oh, we're already on line 60. Okay, cool. Is employee. Role ID. Oh. Okay. If you notice in the user factory, I'm not actually making a new factory for that role, and it's because the roles are very specifically assigned to these constants, and a seeder exists for these roles. So the issue is that my test, even though they're refreshing the database, they're not running the seeders to set up the application in its kind of basic state, meaning to have the roles and locations and all these things that are out there. So let's go set that up. Now you can seed things here right in your test. I think you can, we can do the setup and do call seed and all the stuff. But the reality is we could just do it up here. Just do it in the top test case class. If I'm ever doing any kind of HTTP or Laravel test, which is what we extend here, this base test case is Laravel's. If we're using Laravel's testing framework and not just PHP unit or PEST directly, then I would just want my application to be seeded. We know that we're doing things with the application in this case. So I think they have like a protected seed, maybe? It's seed or seeder. I think it's just seed, and you say true. It seems to not like that, but let's just try it anyway. Oh, okay, great. Okay, so it is seed. I don't know why PHP Storm wasn't auto-completing that, but let's turn on the seeders to be true. And what this is going to do is it's just going to run our, it's going to run our database seeder, which just sets up the roles and the accessory types, the color types, the badge types, the divisions, the reasons, the locations, the states, all these things, again, that the system needs. There's no reason for us to make fake states like this is a US-based application, so it has the US states. So again, we can just run the seeder for our tests. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's good. We're going to keep running into problems in our test suite if we don't have the data that the application expects to have. Okay, now we're getting the actual good failure that we want. And we just yesterday threw in a placeholder of whatever.zip, but it has a faker, BS name for the path, right? So let's go look at our badge request archive factory. And if we go up, it just has kind of this generic file path. I'm going to change this to URL. Let's run this again. Oh, what did I break? Response does not. Okay, so we're getting the dump. That's good. Did I make something? It's interesting that we're going back to the old error. Did I break the seeders? What did I just do? Let's put this back. It's very strange that maybe the path. Oh, maybe like URL's not accepted? That's strange. I don't know why changing that to URL makes it not work, but maybe it contains stuff that path doesn't allow. Anyway, the point is that to make this run the way we want, we would want to be able to create this with a very specific path that we can then assert on, right? Otherwise, it's just kind of always random. The easiest thing to do, I guess, is you could just let this create, and then here for the file name, you could just say badge request archive path. That probably will pass. Oh no, it gives me a full path. Private var folders. Okay. So the expected is what we passed in, this private var folders, all this stuff that Faker puts in to the file path. So you would technically do something like base name here. It's a bit strange. And that's because of how Laravel works underneath. Its file name is assumed to be the base name. Laravel does all that for us. So we could write the test like this, but I feel like it's a little bit convoluted. You kind of have to know what the faker path is, and you kind of have to know that it's really getting the base name. And I feel like this test is fine, but the pieces of that are like a little fuzzy, right? You probably, if you're watching live, you probably weren't totally following along with all of that. It's just a little fuzzy. So part of me, in these scenarios where I'm really testing a very particular thing, I like to be just in a bit more control. And so what I'd rather do here is just say something like, example storage path, and then file name, right? I want to demonstrate kind of what's going on. Remember that your tests are code too, and someday, someone's going to come in after you, or even just future you is going to come in here, and you're going to be like, why the hell am I doing base name right here? Maybe you've forgotten how Laravel, that piece of Laravel works. Maybe you're not looking at the code. Maybe you're just looking at the test. So again, I just want to make this a little more explicit on like what and why we're testing things, right? So let's just change this to, we could just say like archive storage path file name. So it doesn't matter what that path is, right? It's what it has more to do with is, again, making this test a bit more readable, right? And so here we can just say something like this, faker. Oops, we don't have that trait, so let's get it with faker. All right, cool. Let's go back to where we were. So this faker, and we could just pull in like a SHA-1. It doesn't really matter. And we'll throw on .zip. Again, let's make it a little bit real world, a little bit readable. So We're going to make this fake file name. It's going to vary per test, so we're not just locking this into just some path that someone could potentially hard code, right? We don't want to make it too real world. We want to still have it vary, right? Or mutate, I guess is what people call that sometimes in tests. So this is going to give us the variance. That SHA-1's going to change every time this test case runs. But the point is that it's stored in some kind of real world path, and that's just the file name. And now instead of all this logic down here, we can say file name. And I feel like this should pass. Oh, it did not. It should pass. It doesn't. So we need to go look at what path's kind of doing underneath. I think we've run into this, and I kind of dodged it a minute ago, but it seems like path is doing something underneath that we don't really know. Either that or download is doing something that we don't really know. So let's go take a look. Let's get rid of this dump, and we download the file. Okay, so what does this take? This takes an SPL file or a string to the file. Okay, it automatically does disposition attachment, and the file name should be the closing name here. So we have archive storage path, file name. We assert download on the file name. But we're back to our initial error of response does not offer a file download. Okay, now is it because this file actually needs to exist? Does this actually exist on the system? Does the file path, does Faker actually pull a real file? That's interesting. Let's find out. It does. Look at that. That is strange. Yeah, look, this was created just a few minutes ago. So assert download, that's crazy that Laravel's really pulling in a file. I mean, HTTP tests or integration tests, it's actually calling your application, like it's actually trying to pull down this file. That's nuts. I didn't expect that. So all the more reason that, again, using Faker directly is a little bit black box. Like it's actually pulling. I see why URL didn't work, is because Faker's actually putting a file on the system. So I do want to go back and make this URL, because I really don't want to be putting files on the system. So I think let's just go back and put that to be URL. The tricky part here now, though, is that, again, this was written several years ago. I clearly was not using the storage facade, or at least not right here. This just pulls that path back. What would be nice is either to A, fake this so it doesn't actually look for a new path, or B, we give it some kind of fixtured path. So let's check the docs. Laravel.com. There's always some nuance to writing tests. Assert download, HTTP test. Okay, assert that the response is a download. Typically this means, or storage download response. If you wish to assert that a downloadable file was assigned a given name, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's nothing in here necessarily about faking. The understanding is that you're actually downloading a real world bit there. Ew, that's gross. It's kind of gross. Huh. How do we want to get around this? You would have to call, again, you kind of have to know the inner workings of Laravel. I bet if you look at this, assert download, or if you dug down into response download, I bet you would see, let's get rid of some of these. I bet you would see, if you dove down into here, that this file path, it's not necessarily pulling from storage. Yeah, it actually attempts to read this file. So you'd have to pass it a path to a real file, which is again, it's just kind of gross. I don't want to spend the whole stream on this. Let me show you what I would like to do. I would like to keep this, but really what you would have to do is you would have to do two things, and I think I'm going to save this for a potential refactor. So if you really wanted to do this and make this work, this path, as we've seen, would have to be real, which would mean that I'd have to do some kind of like file, put to that location, and then, reasonably I would like file delete afterward just to clean up for the test. And again, that setup feels a little ugly, feels a little funky. So I think what I'm going to do here is, instead of all of this, we'll just say this faker file path, and we'll let it do a generic file on the system, and then we can still kind of keep that base name thing here. And I think there's an opportunity to refactor this, but that's why this ended up working, is because file path is actually making a real file. I would not have guessed that. I would have thought it would have just given me a generic file name. So if we do badge request archive and path, I think we should be back to a passing state, and we are. So the refactor here, I think, if we, not in our test necessarily, but in our code, let's just outline a few refactors, and then let's keep moving to another test. So refactor to use storage facade. If we refactor to use a storage facade, then we could fake this out a little more easily and do our assertions that way. But also, what if what if the badge, in looking at this, what if the badge request archive has, or well, let's make this more simple. What if path is equal to null, right? That's interesting. I mean, somehow, even just if you hacked at the URL, you could get, a badge request archive that hasn't been archived yet. We saw in the migration for this the other day that's a nullable column, right? Or we saw even in the model show output, if we go back to model show on badge request archive, we can see that path is nullable. So what if it's null, right? You can't just download a null path that's going to throw an exception. So there's definitely some opportunity to clean up, to improve this now that we put our test hats on, but also to refactor it, truly refactor it to use the storage facade, because this test has kind of revealed that this is, it's a little difficult to test, right? We actually have to have a real file on the system that we're allowed to download. And what if you had restrictions on the type of download or the content type, then you actually have to have a real zip file. So that's a little ugly. That's a little hard to test, I think. It's not hard to test, but it's got some extra setup that it really doesn't need. I think the ideal state would have been to be able to just say, hey, here's this, completely fake file with a fake name that we control in our tests, and that's the one you downloaded. And we can do that, but we need to probably leverage the storage facade to do so. All right, let's move on. That's just show. That's actually the easy one, believe it or not. The harder one is store, and so let's try to test this while we're going through it. All right, so let's take a look at what store does. It figures out badge requests that are unprocessed, and it selects their IDs and then calls get. So it just gets all the IDs for the unprocessed badges. And if those are empty, then it just kind of redirects you back to the index. So there's path number one. That's the easy path. We can just go write that right now. So let's do that. Let's write this test. All right, so we'll go back up to store is in here somewhere. There we go. Store redirects. Let's do this. Store redirects when when there are no unprocessed badge requests. All right, I'll just type it all out. Why not? That is one of the main selling points for Pest. As a bit of a tangent, is I want to write a sentence there. Like I don't want to do all these underscore snake case things. I just want to write a sentence. Okay, we're gonna get rid of this ×3 because again, it processes them when there are no badges. We know from earlier that we need to be an administrator. So let's go ahead and fix that while we're here. And then we want to store. Honestly, I don't think store takes anything. I think it's just, is there any kind of request user? That's all it takes. Doesn't seem to have any other request data. So we're just posting to it in a, restful sense to create, right? So it's just to leverage the resourceful controller actions, which is correct. Again, we're creating a badge archive request. It's just we're not actually posting any data. Okay, in this case, it already has the assert redirect request set up for us, and I think the only other additional assertion would be, it looked like we flashed something. There we go, session flash. So we'll say assert session has that, archive empty, and I guess it's true, I think is what flash gives you by default. Cool, all right, let's just run this to avoid any noise. So we'll filter that, and we auto pass. Cool. All right, let's just change this just for an example here. Let's just say something like it redirected us to show. So we get a failure there, cool. So we headshotted this on the first bit here, but basically we've got a user that's able to access this endpoint. We sign in or authenticate as that user, and then we send a post request to store. That gets us here. There are no badges because we didn't make any fake data, so the badge requests end up being empty. There's no badges to process for the badge request archive, so we ultimately redirect. Now, I'm here right now. We just wrote this test. It's passing. Let's go ahead and just kind of refactor this. There's really no reason to do. We can do this as a one-liner. It's not flash. I think it's just with. And there's a bit of a nuance here. With takes null, whereas flash as default is true. I've run into this a couple times. That's why I'm bringing it up. So to get this to pass, and we'll see that this is why a true refactor has tests. We'll watch this fail. So let's run. And we'll see failed asserting that null matches true, right? And that's because in the test, we said, hey, archive empty is true, because that's what flash did. But when we went to refactor this, thinking that this behaves the same way and to make a nice little one-liner, well, it didn't work the same, because with its default is null, not true. So we actually need to say true here. Now, I don't know if I'm testing for that in the view. It may only test for the presence of that bit, but just a little nuance there. And again, why having a test before you actually go and do that one-liner, you might have thought, oh, that's great, but you actually technically broke something. And that's why I was kind of harping on true refactors earlier. I would love, again, as another tangent, I would love to see just flash here. Why can't we just have flash here? And then it behaves the same way, right? Anyway, whatever. So make sure we're still passing after all that rant. Cool, and we are. Now let's write the better test. So we've tested this segment of code. Now we need to test this segment of code. So I'm just gonna borrow from this because it's pretty close. So we'll say something store redirects. Do we redirect? I think we do. We do still redirect to the index page. Awesome. So let's finish that out. What else do we do? We say archive created. So let's change this to archive empty to archive created. We don't need to pass anything in. We still want to be a user, but now we need to have a couple unprocessed badges in the system. So we can say something like requests or badge requests equals, let's say, what do we have here? Badge request factory count 3, and we would be unprocessed, and then create. All right, now we need to go to our badge request factory because that unprocessed state does not exist. So badge request factory, what do we have here? See, yeah, we don't even, I think it's called archive ID if we go look for that, or if we go back to our actual code. Let's close some of these things so we can jump back and forth a little easier. We don't need all these test case or responses up. So if we go here, badge request, wherein ID are those badges, we would update them and set the archive to be this new archive bit. So it's a little interesting here. We actually, again, this code's several years old. I've learned a lot more about Laravel since then, but I don't think we need to do this query. We could just call update on the badges that we already requested, right? So again, little refactor opportunity here once we write this test. What time is it? All right, cool. Let's keep going. Let's finish this test. Let's do the refactor, and then I'll write a test for the console command tomorrow. Because we're kind of refactoring as we go here, which is cool. Okay, so we'll say store creates archive and redirect. Creates archive for unprocessed badge requests and redirects. All right, cool. So we have that part. We have our unprocessed badges. We now need to go down here and make a public function unprocessed. It seems like by default they're unprocessed actually. So we actually don't need. We would need a processed one is what we would need. So let's do processed. So we'll say processed, and then we'll return this state, and we really just say archive equals badge request archive factory. All right. So you're unprocessed by default, which I think is fair. And then this returns a static, the current class, and we need a semicolon. All right, so we actually don't have that. We're unprocessed by default. But what I want to do, the reason we'll go ahead and use that is we will say badge request factory processed create. Let's put one in the database that is already processed to demonstrate that we're not going to pull that as part of our badge request, right? Okay, cool. And then now what we would want to assert is that we made, how do we make a new one? We create with user, right? So let's jump down here. We create with the user. We make a new self, we set the user ID, we save, we return. Okay, fair enough. Let's go ahead and add a type in here, badge request archive or self. All right, cool. So we make a new badge request archive and then we set the old badge requests to that. So what we would want to assert here is archive is equal to badge request archive where user ID is equal to user ID, and we'll say get, and I'll show you why I'm doing get here in a second. Now we're going to say this assert same, and we'll count this. So we'll say 1 is archive, and then user ID, or sorry, archive count. So we're going to pull all the badge request archives where it's for the current signed in user. There should only be one, the new one that's created, not any that came from our factories, just the one that was created, right? So that's why we're asserting that it's the same. And then now we can make some assertions on it, like archive equals archive first. We'll pull the very first one, and then we can assert same on some other stuff. And I don't know what a badge request archive has actually. Let's go find out. I don't think it really has anything. We would just say like process data is null. What else could we do? Yeah. We could even test a little bit of our model, right? So we could go so far as to say like assert false archive processed, right? It's a nice little way to test the model. And then finally, we would want to make sure that the badge requests, if we refreshed those or we pulled them back from the database, we want to make sure that the counts match up, or the IDs match up in this case. So we want to make sure that all those badge requests that we created for this bit, their ID, their archive ID, is this new one that was created. And that kind of makes, again, that does that kind of touch point testing that I like to call, where it makes sure that everything lines up the way we expect. So the final thing to do here is, first, we could go so far as to say badge request. Let's hold on to this one too. We would say that if we badge request refresh, if we pulled that back from the database, we want to make sure that this one didn't get changed, right? Well, we actually don't even need to do that. Let's do this a different way. We could do it that way, but I think it's kind of the long way around. Let's be more explicit again about what we want to test. I think what we want to do here is we want to write a new query. I don't even think we need to keep these anymore, to be honest. Let's say processed badge requests is equal to, let's just do another query, badge request where the archive ID is equal to our archive ID, and then we'll get those. And we'll kind of do the same thing here. We want to make sure that the count is 3 in this case, right? Because we made the 3. And then we would also want to probably make sure that assert equals. And if we plucked the IDs, they should match the IDs that came from the ones that we created up there. So I think we actually are going to need to keep these. So we'll say badge requests is equal to that. And we'll basically say that badge requests, the expected, right? Assert equals expected and then actual. So we'll say badge request pluck ID. That's actually going to be, pluck's going to give us a collection. So we're going to have to say all. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. The process badge requests pluck ID all. So long as these sets match up, the numbers are the same, then it only set whatever we set. We didn't pick up this extra one. We didn't do more. We didn't do less. We did exactly what we expected, right? So there we go. We've written the test for that. A little hairy, but a lot of data is moving around. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's just borrow this so we can filter it out. Vendor bin PHP unit, filter that one. Okay, badge request has no column requester ID. Okay, it seems like our factory might be a little out of date. So let's go look at our badge request factory. It calls it a requester ID. Let's go check the actual badge request model and see what's going on here. Again, I might not have followed convention on this name, so let's see what's going on. So we've got this requester. Requester belongs to user with trashed. Okay, because you can delete a user. That makes sense. Requester ID. What does the database call it? Badge requests table. Administrator process user ID. Those don't line up. Badge requests user ID. Yeah. So I did make the database conventional, but based on the relationship name, I would have kind of expected this to be requester ID. Now, it's conventional because everything's related. I just changed the name of this, but it seems like because of that, this would need to be that. I think if we run this again, we'll see potentially a better result. Okay, so now it has no column named archive. Okay, interesting. What's setting archive? Do I set it here? I don't set it here. Oh, sorry, that was my state. Archive ID. There we go. Okay, we're back to a better place here. Okay, so failed asserting that the two strings are equal. Request archive request. Oh, did I change the wrong thing? Session has archive created. Archive request store request index. Did that go to the wrong place? Archive. Oh, archive request index. It's not the same place. That's interesting. That one redirects to a different place than the other. That's strange. Okay, we'll go here. Just goes to a different place. No problem. Let's run that. Okay, failed asserting that 2 is identical to 3. Where is this? Line 105. So 105 is here. Interesting. Okay. Failed asserting that 2 is identical to 3. Oh wait, sorry, 105 is here. Archive count. Oh, that's wrong. Archive count. That's strange. It's badge requests. Archive count. There we go, we passed. It's strange that it said that archive counts 2 though. Failed asserting that 2 is equal to 3. Why would archive be 2? That's strange. I don't know why count. I don't know where it came up with count 2 for that. But anyway, rabbit hole. Okay, so a couple fixes here. First, this redirected to a different place. I guess if you don't have any badge requests pending, then it kicks you to the badge requests page to create one. It's kind of strange that it does that. You think it would go back to the archive request page. So that might actually be a bug. I'm going to check that off stream. So that was the first issue. Second issue, I just copy and pasted archive here instead of the actual badge requests. So to recap this, we are looking for all of the badge requests that have now been processed, which is what our code does right here. It sets those that are unprocessed to that. And then that should be 3 because that's how many we created up here that were unprocessed. And then we want to make sure, just for, totally explicit, we want to make sure that those 3 were the actual 3 that we created up here. And again, this one's not included. So there are others in the database just to kind of attempt to throw it off. So I feel pretty strong about this. I think let's finish up with a couple quick refactors. First, we know that we can take this and move it down here to be a width instead of a flash. And for now, we'll pass this true to keep the tests happy. So tiny little refactor there. All right, we're still passing. So again, one at a time. And then the next thing I think that makes sense is, why are we querying for all of these again? We know what they are, right? So we should be able to, I guess the update, does the update do it automatically? I think it does. There actually might not be a refactor here. I think you could streamline this and say something like badge requests update. You could just call update on the ones. There's no reason to kind of handcraft the query. I think you can do this. We're about to find out. No, you can't do it that way. So update doesn't exist on the Eloquent collection. You would actually have to say something like update each and then do like that higher order method. And I think, nope, that doesn't work either. Just kidding. How can you craft that query? Let's dump this out. I think you can say like to SQL, maybe not. We'd have to echo it. No function to SQL. Is it like to raw SQL? Does anybody know in the chat? I always forget. Call to member function on int. All right, you'd have to, I think you have to do it earlier. Yeah, now you're calling it on string. So I don't think this is fair because you're gonna have to, if we like echoed that out, or let's just DD this. This is just gonna show a select statement, right? Like, oh, got all sorts of crazy code going on here. Yeah, this is gonna show a select. I don't think you can dump update in front of it because it's gonna crap out. How do you, I guess ultimately I was just trying to make this a little more performant. Hey Samuel, how's it going? Hey Morton. Yeah, I feel like there's a more succinct way to write this. Yeah, what is that? So let's do this. Let's dump out what we have. Let's just spend like 3 minutes here and see if we do badge request to base. Whoops. To base. Yeah, you can't do that. Is it like to query base? What do they hold? Let's dig deeper here. Whoops, sorry. All over the place. Let's var this out so we know what it is and get some help from PHP Storm. So we'll say at var eloquent or collection. It would be an eloquent collection. Badge request. All right, that might give us a little more completion. So to base collection, do you say to query? There we go. To query. This will give us the builder. Okay, there we go. So you could do this. You could do this. Let's just bring back the old, so it's kind of easier to see what. So this passes. Yeah, this passes. So I was trying to take this code and leverage it in a cleaner way where we don't have to like do that part by hand. So this whole initial statement here where we're like plucking the IDs and we're putting them in the where ID and whatever, we're kind of handcrafting that same query again. Whereas if we just said, base request to query, we kind of get the same thing. So I'm just curious what toQuery does. So it pulls the first one out, it gets the model class, it filters. Yeah. So it basically it does what we do. It does a new query where the key are those model keys. So it does some stuff for us under the cover. I think this is probably like it's definitely a more eloquent double pun there, way to write this. Instead of handcrafting that query ourselves, we're letting kind of eloquent do it for us. That has some value in it, I guess, because, again, we're passing in. We don't have to know what the key is. They're doing that for us. We're not having to kind of hand pluck things ourselves. Now, if you wanted that little like super eked out bit of performance, then probably writing it yourself is probably, fine. But to leverage what we already have, I think that is a worthwhile refactor. So again, we're back to passing. That's kind of where I wanted to end. I would have expected there to be maybe a cleaner way to write an update. But you'd have to do like a DB update. You could do all that stuff all in one if you really wanted. But I think to leverage Eloquent, this is probably what makes sense. You already have all that stuff. You've already queried those. No reason to kind of pluck and mess with that collection yourself. You can just turn it back into a query and then update those. So that should still be pretty performant, I would think, as far as the SQL generated. So cool. Okay, well we have what we wanted to do here. Took a minute, but we found some opportunities for refactoring. So I think we'll do this refactor tomorrow once I kind of mess around with kind of the storage facade and see exactly, am I already using the storage facade or am I not? I'll kind of do some research on the application and dig a little deeper. That way we can just jump right in on this piece. And then I want to write a test for the other side of this. This makes a archive, but we need to, again, make sure that this is getting processed. And when it's processed, the ID is getting updated, and then we're able to show it here. So we're going to bring it kind of full circle to see where it actually gets generated and go from there. So anyway, should be good. So let's stream again tomorrow, or I'll stream again tomorrow, and we'll kind of finish that by making sure that the whole flow is complete, and we'll end here by then knowing what the path is, what we can expect, and finish this particular refactor. So we'll bring it full circle. So with that point, thanks everyone for joining live. I will see you all tomorrow.